My name is Joe Buskins. This is our family's boat shop. I actually grew up in this boat shop. My dad was a U.S. Coast Guard licensed professional boat builder, as am I. I also hold a 100-ton captain's license, and we fish all through the summer months out in the Gulf of Mexico catching all kind of fish. But we're in the boat shop today doing epoxy work with plywood. We just actually put several layers of 1708 biaxial fiberglass fabric with the West Systems epoxy over some marine plywood. And even prior to that episode, we actually showed how we laminated these pieces together as if it was a mock-up stringer system and a transom assembly. And we even showed how our big transom clamps back there on the back wall, because it seems like floors, stringers, and transoms are real common problems for you guys. So we're trying to tie all this together. But what we're doing, we were talking about working like quality work, but working efficiently. And amine blush is something that happens with epoxy after it's had its full time to cure. But in the boat shop, we want to do a quality job, but we want to move things along. And if you catch the epoxy just right, so we've just laminated this about 45 minutes ago, and if you catch it fast enough, you can actually get some fairing filler on there before it produces an amine blush, and that saves you that step. So I'm going to show you guys what we're going to be using. Now again, we did a video not long ago showing all of the different West Systems fillers and putties, but these are the materials that I like to use when it comes to fairing out a surface, which fairing would be like body work. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to take this rough piece and we're going to kind of make it look like this piece. This piece has been filled and faired, although this is polyester resin and polyester filler. So completely different animals, not really compatible with one another, other than that you can put epoxy over polyesters in a lot of instances. But generally when we're working with polyester resin, we use polyester fillers and vice versa. So we're going with the West Systems. We're going one pump for one pump. These are calibrated pumps, and they're giving you the correct ratio every time. Now obviously there's more resin than there is catalyst, but there's a specific ratio to follow. So I'm going to start with a fairly small amount initially, because we are using a fast hardener. This is the 205 fast. And again, the resins we work with are called exothermic resins. They create heat when they cure, and if you mix up a lot of it, it creates a lot of heat. Now, it's fairly cool temperatures. It's about 70 or so degrees Fahrenheit. You guys, Celsius, I think it's 16, 17 degrees-ish. If it's summertime and really hot, you would want to use a slow hardener. That'll give you more work time. Now, generally, again, it's wintertime and we got enough time to work with here, but I generally like to try to activate the resin and hardener first and then add the fillers. When it's really, really hot, you can actually add some of the resin and get it partially mixed and then add the correct amount of catalyst. It gives you a little more cure time. So what I want to do, I'm going to put my mask on. I've got a new respirator from 3M that everybody says they can still hear me pretty good. I hope that is the case. But when we're dealing with this stuff, you don't want any airborne particles getting up in your lungs, and especially the colloidal silica. This is a respiratory irritant. So you're going to want to wear a mask, or I have a little apparatus where we used to use the vacuum to draw up the dust. But we're also going to be using some of the low density fairing filler, the 407. Now the 410 is super, super light. And honestly, I don't use it very much unless we're down on like a horizontal surface and we want a very, very light feel or skim. So today, we're just using some, you can get these at the kitchen utensil place, but I find they work great. So we're going to go one heap and scoop of the colloidal silica, and I'm going to go with some of the 407. And a lot of these, what's cool with the West stuff is it's quite all right to blend. And I'm going to kind of just cut that in a little bit. And again, the benefit here, folks, is if you can get the timing right, you do not have to worry about removing the amine blush. And that can be a little bit of work in itself. Now again, there are some epoxies. Usually when you get into the 2-to-1 ratios, you get less of the amine blush than you do with the higher ratio materials. And I will generally add a little bit of material, see what kind of consistency we're getting, and then go a little more as needed. More of the 407. So that's definitely starting to thicken. Yeah. Now again, if you're new to the channel, we've just posted a video. A lot of folks will call this peanut butter. Now this is more of a fairing filler to me than an adhesive, but peanut butter, we would normally put some of the microfibers. Is kind of just a personal preference for me. And you can make some material that's very, very strong, and that's what we use for gluing transoms together. And even if you're doing like a little stitching glue boats, like our little skiffs in the background. All right, so that's looking pretty good. I like it. I like it. You don't want it to be any drier than it has to be. If it's too soupy, it'll run. If it's too dry, it doesn't bond very well to the substrate or the surface. So what we've got are a variety of blades, and I made these blades. You just take the corners, and I like to take the sandpaper and sand the corners off and get some different profiles and sizes. And a little trick, guys, remember talking about this stuff getting hot. As soon as it is mixed, you want to get it out on the board. Get it out of a mass and get some air going over this stuff. Kind of get it spread out, because once it starts to activate what we call kick, there ain't no stopping it. It's going. So I like this mix pretty good. I'm going to start with a medium-sized blade. It almost looks good enough to eat, doesn't it? It looks like chocolate icing, man. Chocolate ganache, huh? Good stuff. All right. So again, if you spread that out, you get airflow across that. It'll keep it nice and cool. And what we're looking for, this is, you can see that it's still wanting to stick to my finger, but it has definitely firmed. You can see it's not pulling or dragging, so it's not fully cured, but it definitely has some tack to it. That is the sweet spot with this. If you wait too long, you're going to have an amine blush, and then you got to wait for it to go through its full cure cycle and then clean the blush. So we got the contoured corners, which are going to fit in these edges here. Look at that, pretty. We'll start right. Like so. A lot of times we like to just try to get some material everywhere. get it off the board, get it on the panel, and then we'll move it. We can move it around as needed. Now sometimes it requires more than one fill there, guys, and that's okay. Certainly okay to come back as needed, but especially like for us at the end of the day here, we'll try to get some filler on a project, and that way when we come back in the morning it's ready to prep and get right back to work. Time is money, and I know even you folks working at home, whether it be getting your boat on the water or if you work offshore or something and only have a few days to get the project done, you know, the faster you can get it done and more efficiently, the sooner you can go to using your boat or RV, what have you. Okay, that's pretty good, and you can see this glass has firmed up enough we should be good to go with another batch. Now sometimes you have to balance this out, guys. Sometimes you got to get fresh cups, and that's why I like these little disposable, we call them popcorn cups, and we bought these at our local boat owner's warehouse. But I'm going to try, we're getting better at having links to all the stuff we're using. And I just spoke to a gentleman the other day. He said he did not realize that buying products he's going to use through our links actually helps support the channel. So if you guys want to purchase anything that we're using, be sure to look in the description below the video, and there's a high probability that you can get what you need, pretty much all the stuff that we're using here. All right, so we got another little batch. Now we do have a little bit of residue in there from the previous batch, but I'm working pretty fast. Now if you're new to this, you may want to just start with a fresh container every time. All right, that's looking pretty good. About like that. It's about what you want. Now I don't tend to like to use a machine to mix this because it can introduce a lot of air. I usually just do it with a stirring stick. A little bit longer one would probably be better. There we go. A little more power. Little more power there. That should be good. I'm going to be sure that is still workable. All right. So again, remember the trick of getting this material out and spreading it out as quick as you can will minimize the heat. Look at that. I'm telling you, that looks like something I would eat. Love some chocolate. Love some chocolate. I have to label that. If I had some kids in here, man, I'd have to be careful. All right. So we're probably not going to do this whole piece tonight. Well, I probably will, but I probably won't video all of it. But a lot of my viewers, we were talking the other day about how YouTube works, and they like to see the longer durations. It's really the watch time that helps the channel. And so if you guys are so inclined, and I try to put good tips in here all throughout, watch these videos through and through. It'll help us do more of this kind of stuff. All right, here we go. Start right back here at the back. Sometimes you can see how we're getting these little checks. You got to come back the other way. There we go. That'll definitely help hide and blend some of those little ripples and imperfections. Now the tops of these stringers can be a little tricky. Sometimes I will just get some material on there and you end up just having to kind of leave a hard corner. Sometimes you can pull it over a little bit, soften it. But this stuff actually sands pretty nice. Especially if you catch it, like if we can get this as soon as it starts to firm up, like firm enough that it doesn't gum up your paper, it's going to still be softer. After it's cured several days, it's going to get harder. It'll get harder and harder and harder. So bear that in mind. I wouldn't put a lot of filler over a huge area if you're not going to have some time to come back and fair on it a little bit, because if you put filler on and then come back in a week, it's going to be a lot harder to sand than if you can sand it the next day. You can also use different size spreaders. A bigger one, like on this one, this covers the whole width. That might be a little better. You can see behind me, that's going to get a better cosmetic. You got that one nice sweep. Same for this one. Sometimes you got to come back and put a little bit more in the corner. It's nearly impossible to get it perfect in one coat. I'm going to try to get this one side at least coated for you folks and show you what the end product should more or less look like. The corners are a little tricky. Sometimes you just gotta come back and add some material, a little bit of touch up. Sometimes what I will do on these corners, we'll either leave them crisp like that, or you can take the blade and just put some little, I guess you would call them facets. You're kind of just softening that a little bit. It's quite easy to sand and correct it though. It's honestly better to get more on there than you think you need, and you can sand it off. If you go super thin, then you're gonna have to come back and add more filler, and that adds more time. So generally I would say try to get a pretty good bit on there, but I'm pretty happy with that for the first, I would say for the first pass. I've got a little more material. I might go ahead and float this on there just to give you guys a little more idea of what and how we do. I may come back. Now, if we weren't going home, I could let this just start to firm up and come back in here and hit that with like a little radius tool and put a little bit of material right in that corner. I'm not going to be able to tonight, but you could do the same deal. This stuff will firm up. still going to be a little tacky. You'll kind of be able to put your finger in it and it'll stick to you a little bit, but it won't run or drag. Go ahead and mix up another little batch, and you can come right back in here and put a little more material right in that corner. And then it saves you that time that otherwise would have to be spent cleaning up that amine blush. Now, when it comes to removing the amine blush, again, we've got a whole series of videos, and a lot of them are very detailed and quite long, but I've also done several others that are detailed, but just one component of the job. And we did a video when we first resin coated this about amine blush removal. And I've had a couple comments because the correct way to remove amine blush is with water. It's a water soluble byproduct of the curing process. And that's just not my opinion. That's like coming directly from like West Systems, which West is one of the biggest suppliers, makers, manufacturers of epoxy systems. Now, there are many other companies, maybe they have different recommendations, but we've been doing it this way for a long time, and it seems contradictory or counterintuitive. You may say, well, man, the last thing I want to do is put water on something I'm trying to work with, but you are not supposed to use solvents, and you are not supposed to just try to sand it away. It will grind it into the material, and it's going to almost be like a release film for subsequent layers. So it's kind of one of those deals. You can believe what you want, or you can actually, there's a 1-800 number. You can call your resin manufacturer and see what they say. But water and or a very mild soap solution. And when I say mild, sometimes just a drop or two. I'm talking about a tiny bit of material. And importantly, you're going to be wanting to use a Scotch-Brite pad. Terry cloth towel. Usually the water that we use is warm. It doesn't have to be scalding hot. It doesn't have to be hot at all. It can be cold, I suppose, but it does seem like warm water. And you guys will notice I wrung out the majority of the moisture. Now, one of the reasons we use this paint scraper is because sometimes when you're applying filler, you'll get these sharp little burrs and edges that'll grab your cloth. And if you try to sand, that's grinding the amine in. But the scraper is a great way to remove some of those high points. So super mild soapy solution, that's totally optional. It can just be clean water for you guys. And we're just gonna very methodically start at one end. You can see right there, there was a little burr. You can see there's a little burr that it's hanging up on that I didn't get in there. Now, one thing I did too, if it makes you feel better, on this piece, we did have an exposed edge, and I actually ran some blue tape to kind of protect or shield that edge just a little bit. But if this were in a boat, you would not have a lot of exposed, unfinished, or uncoated material as far as the wood is concerned. All right, so I did one side, and I'm going to turn that cloth and do it again with a fresh side. Now, this is so important, folks. Prep is a big deal, and if you don't prepare properly, you're going to have problems. Take the time to do it right. Do not skip. What we're doing here, sometimes you may feel like, well, I'll just fast forward and I'll miss some of this stuff, and it's not that important, but it could drastically impact the performance of the materials you're using. If you don't prep it properly, you're gonna have problems. Okay, so I've changed, we wiped with this surface. Now I folded the cloth so that we got some fresh exposed material. And you can see as we wipe it, this is where the difference, folks, between professional caliber work and home caliber work. And I'm trying to help you guys bridge the distance where you guys are getting some quality results, but you can do it at home Again, you guys out there that are pros, I understand there are some fancier, higher end, I'm gonna rinse this in the soapy part, get some of that residue out. There's not a whole lot coming out of there. Again, there's a product called Peel Ply that you can use that will prevent an amine blush from forming. Basically, it creates a surface layer material and you peel it off after the epoxy has cured. Now I'm going to completely clean water. Now you certainly could even use 2 cloths if you wanted to, guys. And that could work, but removal of the blush is important. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna wipe this, or what I would do is wipe this again another time with a clean cloth. And then while it is damp, take your Scotch-Brite pad, wring it out. I'm gonna collect a little bit of that excess water. We don't want just tons of water running around. But again, super important to remove that amine blush. One of my favorite tools in the shop is gonna be a heat gun. That's a Craftsman. This one's got a thermostat on it where you can turn it way up, turn it way down. Yep. I gotta put my glasses on to even see what we're doing. And this thing will create some crazy, crazy heat. All right. Now, one thing you can do, obviously, is you can wipe off some of the excess with a shop towel while you're throwing some heat on there. You can see it drying. Check this out. There, look at this. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. You can see that this material has totally changed colors after. Watch the surface change. How about that? So what I want, obviously we want to get the moisture off of there before we start sanding, but I don't want the water to sit on there any longer than it has to. And we've touched on this in different videos. Epoxy resin, polyester resins, and wood, you don't want moisture or water on the surface when you're trying to bond new material. And that's why we're getting these comments. Some of these folks are like, man, that seems crazy to put water on the surface you're about to do. But if you take the edges, work fast, and then come back right behind it with a heat gun or some other apparatus, you can see this is already starting to dry. Yep, you can see the heat gun doing the work. Yeah, there's a little spot right there. Yep, you can see that moisture just going away. Because I understand not everybody has perfect conditions. Or again, some of the high-end equipment, the vacuum bagging, and there's some other resin infusion. And again, even like with the Peel Ply, you may not even realize that amine blush is something that happens, or you may not want to have to buy another product. All right, very, very good. So what we have, a real variety of tools. Now we've got a dual action sander. We've got a little square. This is just a little DeWalt. This is a high-end air tool. This is electric that you could pick up at all your Home Depot stores. Generally, when we're preparing an epoxy surface after it's been cleaned of the amine blush, I like to use pretty aggressive grit paper. This is 40 grit. This is 80 grit. I don't really like going any finer than 80. I would say probably 120 at the minimum as far as producing a surface on here for your subsequent layers. So I'm going to kind of demonstrate what this is going to look like. again, let's go back.
And again, you can always use a vacuum. You may want to see how a little dual action that can work very well. Also, now, sometimes we break out the big guns. That's a big Hutchins air tool. And if you're ferrying out a long area, this guy here is a real beast. Something like that. Or even, you got the Bosch. This is a buffer. We actually I took a Velcro backed buffing pad and I cut it down. I cut it down in size so that we could run a standard like a 60 or 80 grit. And this thing works surprisingly good, but it is going to make some dust. That's going to be a heavy duty material removal tool for sure. But what I like, you can slow it way down. Yep, just like so. Now obviously you're going to want to wear a respirator, have a fan, have the doors open. And I'd even touched on, if you're applying this material, the sooner you can get to sanding, the sooner you can get to sanding on it, the softer it's going to be. It's actually been, oh gosh, a couple days since we put this on. Yeah, 2 days. So it's going to be harder than it would be if you can just get after it as soon as it's dry enough for you to not gum up your sandpaper and be able to get that amine blush off of there. So what I want to do, I want to get ready to prep this. We need to put some more material on here, but I'm going to probably do a little bit of editing and do a little sanding and kind of show you guys what I like the surface to look like prior to our second application of filler. We have wrapped up all the sanding, and I kind of wanted to show you guys the main tools we ended up using were the little square DeWalt with a 40 grit paper. And one of the main reasons I like one like this is it will literally get right up in these corners because it is square in shape. And then we ended up using the big Bosch with a variable speed, and I believe that was a 60 grit Velcro pad for most of the heavy material removal. And again, that is a custom made pad that I did. I'm sure there's something like that commercially available. Now, I kind of wanted to show, let's see if I can highlight here. You can see that there's some thick and thin spots, but that's quite all right. You see we've got bare epoxy and we've got some filler, but we don't have any more shiny surfaces. Pretty much everything has been knocked down, kind of just the initial cut, if you will. Now again, bear in mind, with the first coat of filler, just like when we put the 1708 and epoxy resin down, if you catch it just right,
you could put a subsequent layer, like a second layer of epoxy, probably even a third. But time got in the way for us, and it may happen for you guys. Maybe y'all have one day to work and you have to pick up from a Saturday to Saturday or something. But what I'm gonna do is go ahead and demonstrate. Sometimes if you think you need to wipe the surface down. Now we did vacuum this very thoroughly, and we blew it off a little bit as well, but you can use a little bit of acetone, or there are other solvents that you can use if you feel like maybe there's some additional dust on the surface and you just want to do a real quick little wipe down. Now again, it's optional. It's kind of one of those things, you don't have to do that if you don't want to. I don't usually use a whole lot of that, but sometimes maybe during the week or during the process, say somebody comes up, say somebody comes in from out of the house and they've been eating lunch or something and they rub their hand over the work you've done. That grease or oils can be a contaminant. And again, there are other solvents that are used. There are companies that make like wipe down and wash materials that work really, really good. Sometimes there's not just one singular answer. Now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to run a little bit of air over that. Obviously, I normally would wear the respirator while we're working with acetone or solvents, and I will be through the rest of the day. But prep is so important. It's kind of one of those steps that so many people want to skip. All right. So I'm going to air dry that a little bit. And again, acetone's very flammable. You got to be careful when working with a heat source anywhere near it. But today, you guys may be able to hear it in the background. We've got rain, and not always optimal to be working on a day when you got rain falling, but we're moving forward with our project. And again, sometimes that may be the case. Now, obviously, if water was just dripping right down on there, you would have to stop for the day. But on a high humidity day, this kind of damp and humid, you can come back with a heat gun and warm this surface a little bit prior to your epoxy application. And that is going to really help promote bonding. Okay, so we have warmed up that surface with our heat gun a little bit, and we are going back once more. We're going to be using some more of the low density, the 407 and the 406. Those are kind of my go-tos. Again, if you got some really, really lightweight stuff, you can use the 410, but I find it to be kind of, it's a little bit runny. It kind of wants to drift around and run on you. So I tend to like the others. And again, we're using the West calibrated pumps. It's one pump for one pump. And it should not take as much material on this next fill. I want to thank you guys for tuning in. Support has been tremendous. We actually just released a video. We are now going to be offering or working through Patreon, and what that'll allow you guys and folks out there to do is have more direct access to me if you need to email me or maybe even a phone consult. And I'm excited about it. It's going to be a little learning curve there for us for sure, but I think it's going to be something for you guys that are in a project and you need more information than we're providing in the videos. The videos are not going to stop. They'll continue to roll out. You'll just be able to have better access to me on a one-on-one basis if that's what you need. Just like so. I'm going to thicken that up just a little bit more. Well, now obviously, if you're at home and you're mixing this, you'll kind of get to where you may have a mix you really like, and you can say, well, we'll do 6 pumps of the resin and then 2 heaping scoops of the colloidal silica is going to do the job for you.
Yeah, that's looking really nice there. Okay. You guys remember, we like to go straight to the board as soon as possible. Spread everything out, and that way we don't get much heat buildup in our product. That can be a real problem for sure, is heat buildup. That is something, if you have not worked with epoxy very much, it'll get so hot it will smoke. And it can be a little startling sometimes. All right, we're taking a medium size, and that's got the little corners kind of softened a little bit. And again, we will spread this out. You'll get a longer life for sure. All right. Now sometimes in these corners you can take these blades and get them to bend them almost in a 90 like so, and sometimes that can work well. It can be a little tricky to get it just right. See if I can get it to work for us. There you go. So we got the corner nice and pretty, and then we'll come back maybe with a metal blade, something like that. And again, we soften those corners. That's kind of custom made. We'll come off the corner a little bit and just do a nice smooth. Of course, once we got the corner pretty, you hate to come back in there and mess it up. Yeah. Just like so. Kind of the same up here. Yeah, that's looking pretty nice.
We have finished applying our coats of the thickened epoxy. We've actually given a little bit of time to cure, and you can see we've obviously covered up all of those thin spots of glass. And for the sake of time, you guys have already seen the amine blush removal process, where we just use some clean water, a terry cloth towel for a wipe down, and then a Scotch-Brite pad for a scrub, and then we went with one more dry wipe. So we are ready to hopefully do the finish fairing. And there's, again, a lot of tools you can use. If your budget is super limited, as simple as a little block. But for the money, this little DeWalt square, and we're just taking a sandpaper disc, and I've trimmed the face of it off a little bit. So it's flat on the nose, locked it in there, and man, these things do an amazing job.
Now, this has only been curing for like an hour and a half, 2 hours, so it's dry. It feels hard to the touch, but it's going to be a lot easier to sand than the stuff that was sitting for 2 days. So let's just see how she does. Oh yeah, much better result. Matter of fact, you guys know I like to use the vacuum. If you're at home and want to keep your garage clean and minimize dust, just run the vac while you're working. Obviously, if your budget's a little tighter, again, the 3M blocks, and especially when you're working on a corner like this, you got to be careful with power tools. Sometimes you can sand right through the material. So let's use, so you guys that even without power tools, you can get results. It takes a little more work, but I actually really like a block for the finesse stuff. Yes, looking pretty good. Now, again, right up in these corners, you can see there how the rotary one, the round one, won't get in there that great. But this one will.
Okay guys, we have just about wrapped up the sanding. You can kind of zoom in there. Now it's not a, well, there goes my sanding block. It's not 100% perfect yet. You can see like up in the corner here, there's a few little spots where you can still kind of see the darker material. Now the corners, again, if you do this kind of work, I'm sure you guys know all these little tips and tricks, but a lot of you guys are new to this. I like to just take an old disc of sandpaper and you can kind of just get right in that corner and work it that way, work it from that way. You kind of get the gist of that, or you can use one of the little square blocks and they can be really good for getting up in those tight corners. Now we mostly use the little DeWalt square one that I've shown you guys a couple times, but a lot of times what I like to do is finish up with a block, something a little bit longer, and you're making these long passes over a long distance, and that's going to knock out a lot of the ripples. My dad called them whoop-de-woos. You got these kind of, now what's crazy, if you've never done body work, things can look totally straight, but a lot of times when you run your hand down that surface, you can actually feel little ripples. There's also a product that we use, if you guys look back on one of our more recent gel coat videos where we were working on a real nice skeeter, 3M makes what's called a dry guide coat, and I'll try to put a link to that down below, which that leads me, you guys, a lot of folks have been requesting where to get the materials we're using. There are links below all the descriptions. The descriptions have links below them, and if you guys are looking to buy a lot of the stuff we're using, you can find it there, and that does help support the channel. We've also recently made an announcement that we're going to be available through Patreon now, and that's totally optional. I've already had a few comments. People are like, well, man, I hope your content doesn't suffer. You know, we like the channel the way it is. But all it does is an added feature. It allows you folks out there that need more personal information from me. Like if you want to be able to email me or talk to me directly on the phone, it allows an avenue for that. But we plan to continue to do all kinds of cool projects on here. Just time is super valuable. And the YouTube channel, it's growing, but it's nowhere near how I make most of my living. And we're trying to figure out a way to manage time. But I want you guys to know how much I appreciate your support, how much you guys mean to me. The comments do help us steer the direction of the channel, but the Patreon, again, is just something new for folks that need to be able to get in touch with me and a formal way to do that. So, yes, again, thank you from my heart, everyone who's been following the channel, watching the channel. We will continue this phase. We are probably going to be going to some kind of a high build primer next, and then actually prepping for like a top coat, finish coat, some kind of a marine paint system. Maybe you guys have some suggestions out there for what you guys would like to see us use as we follow through on our little mock-up stringer and transom deal. So it's Captain Joe here with Island Marine Charters, Fish Bump TV here on YouTube, my awesome cameraman working hard behind the scenes. And as always, we will catch you guys next time out.